All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tanner Menard, and I'm a Louisiana native. I grew up around Lafayette. I'm getting a PhD there in creative writing at the University of Louisiana. And I'm a Louisiana Creole, but I also belong to the Attakapaw Ishak Nation. And happy that one of my relatives is here with us today. And when I decided that I was going to get a PhD, I decided that I wanted to see if I could find a way to talk about why poets from the beginning of time have written about what you might call paranormal experiences, or written through paranormal encounter. I would say a type of normal encounter, actually. But it's, especially in the 20th and 21st century, people are happy to write about these poets and to write about the social conditions around these poets, but never take the ontological claims seriously. For instance, I was talking to Leanne, one of my favorite poets, Alice Notley. Everyone rightfully writes about feminist issues in Alice Notley, but nobody writes or takes seriously the fact that she would go into trances and would say, I'm writing telepathic poetics. And I think that part of this is that, structuralism, post-structuralism, the language behind a lot of the literary studies that we look at, if you just look at how consciousness is considered, for instance, in Levi Strauss, he considers consciousness to be the content of consciousness, the words, the images, the grammars of consciousness. But he doesn't actually believe that consciousness exists beyond the content of consciousness. But all that you have to do to know that this is not true, even if you want to take an empirical point of view, is that there are Tibetan monks, for instance, that can stay for extended periods of time in a gamma wave state, meaning they're aware, but they're not thinking discursively. And even Derrida, admitted in his essay on telepathy that in the case of telepathy, deconstruction fails. And so another area, as an indigenous person is, and if an indigenous scholar says, I should be able to write about a vision or a dream in academic writing, for instance, that's taken as culturally true. But nobody believes it. There's no way to take it as ontologically true. And so what I propose is that for literary studies to move forward and to take even the claim of the muse seriously, literary studies and consciousness studies need to merge. We need to take seriously what it means that quantum non-locality was proven to be true. Because basically all materialism is proven false by that claim. So with that, I really wanted to bring together a panel of people who are sort of working with this, with these frameworks, just sort of as their own ontological reality, in whatever way that you're doing. So I was just interested to see what happens if we bring these people together. So what I'd like us to do is to have an experience of consciousness together, an experience of listening, and I'd like to just sort of lead us in a little meditation, I guess you could say, or an experience of consciousness. So if you're willing to go along with that before these beautiful poets read their work, I'd like you to participate with that. So just, if you don't mind, sit up. And you can close your eyes and breathe. Now become completely aware of the right side of the room. As if the left side of the room had no existence, just become completely aware of everything to your right. You can see it, right? And now become completely aware of only the left side of the room. As if nothing exists on your right. Become only aware of what's in the ceiling. Now become aware of what is aware. Find out what could experience that. Gently inhale and exhale. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, Tanner, and thank you for bringing us together. I don't usually share this aspect or element of my work, probably for many of the reasons around, knowledge practices, right, that would occlude this way that other forms of experience and information enter in to poetic work. And I'm just going to read in two parts of something that I have some thinking around this that I have interspersed with poems, and this is just going to probably keep doing this. I saw what would happen before the event. I found a form for the information that I understood beyond the parameters of ordinary exchange through poetry. These temporalities suspended, the glimpse or rise of instant knowing, the dilation, waiting, moving through endlessness and compression, both episodes of exchange and action, significance and meaning. These are aligned. But I was brought to this mode of being through death, through the enmeshments of feeling that younger people often have but don't recognize or are allowed to retain. For me, lyric entry began with openness. I begin with the personal here because it teaches me how to approach the broader forms of ethical witnessing that would later come in my work. I saw what would happen before the event. I'm gonna fix this. Sorry. The creative idiom of seeing is shared with writing, made real, touches truth, that which cannot be altered, even as its forms and expressions form, combine, recombine. The image that appeared was not the picture I had tried to take. Her face, pressing through something like a membrane, distorted, time and its structures. The image would change depending on the intensity of feeling, of context, whether I was at her grave or with others. The ship's prow against a yellow sky on her birthday. After the dream of the plane plummeting, I wrote it down. I was 15. After the dream from which I woke, knowing the pit of an action, but not what kind precisely, I wrote it down. I was 18. By then, I was scared of precognitive knowing with precision. It would put me out of time, I thought. Though it would take me nearly 20 years to situate that knowing, what it meant for the connection I had in the poem, something like an elegy. That's the long work of deep listening. Some things you know but aren't meant for saying until, like a second wave, you do, fomenting. Though he nearly died then, what happened then began his death. I want to share the pretext, a poem constructed of different striations of vision, which is an attempted collage, if that's even the right word, the phenomenology of living and knowing over and across the transom between states. These are the last words that I sent to my cousin who passed away. May death come swift and merciful. Still I have not found the route to you. Running down the hard gray beach I turned, stranded by the railroad track you sought. In the Somerset aegis of proximal love, filially warbling under the magnolia, I kissed your startled sister's brow like you, through my lips my body funereal. Having dreams in the precognitive way, I once awoke knowing the pit of an action, a whole of having happened while I slept. Your head struck the ground, giddy, your head where next you'd shoot. 13 years later, with no signal, those last words I sent, you took to the temple in the fluorescence I saw as blood-filled temporal impacts gap, as blood fills the vessels of recognition. I spoke the future, ever out of grasp. You heard the sound of my voice ethering. I knew which language would reach you, a body so alike it can't be touched. Some aspects of listening arrive, figures of form and feeling beyond aesthetic vocabulary, reaches in the mind, a mind that's distributed into the sensory. You do not know whether you are attuned always in conscious life. For me, it is a hard way for a mind to be, but I push myself where I can to more openness. I spend much of my time thinking in quiet, dark, something like sleep, sometimes also in a dream, willing to liminally be. I also have parameters, have learned for the most part what vision's permissions to grant, and I have help for it. I often say I turn to poetry to make myself legible to the world, but I also turn to it to make what I saw in the world legible to myself, and by extension to everyone connected in that net. A reassurance, though I rely on the formal inherence of the poem, that inherence itself is recognizable, is information that encodes, instantiates my listening. Listening follows love's channels. The night before my father died, I dreamt he was standing beside me, though I could not see him. The church where I would marry, the site of many shared events, not least singing, empty, though he would walk with me, even though I might not see him. I saw what would happen before the event. Lyric address, its intimacies, regardless of whether someone is alive to see or hear it. In this kind of verse, it is often very quiet, though there is trust that you are being witnessed. There is also a coterminous despair that you are not. A conversation with different sensory properties located intellectually in this realm, part of the whole, but the frame extends. I read a poem now as a form of haunting, recurrence, summoning, repetition, revisitation. 2, I saw the event long after it had happened. Entering into the historical discussion of the long afterlives of colonial violences, legacies of devastation for which I believe I must attempt to speak to in my work. Poetry was produced within and alongside it all, a record of direct and indirect awarenesses. I was born in 1988. That's when I entered, an arbitrary year marker, a temporal infrastructure of the dominant kind, the beginning of a record. My entry to lyric poetry that moves beyond the parameters of my own immediate being was imperfect, as it ought to be. But it did not take long, relatively speaking, for the feeling of dissatisfaction to arise, a frustration with a certain form of I and experience felt like a rejection of knowledge rather than its catalog. Documentary poetry is one form that's arisen as an alternative, though there are questions in its practice, even as I have practiced it. The lyric form, as we might be most familiar with it, not as in, say, Sappho's fragments, whose dialogic directness, which grounds her desires, speaking to the beloved, are present, but one that developed much later, relying on epiphany to shift awareness within rhetorical tradition. Leads to abstraction as a practice for creating distance from the world remade by horror, numbing the ends of empire to everything that was destroyed, all, the depth of life that exists in that word alone, that was taken, immeasurable loss. But because it defies measurement, that does not mean it can't be known. We must interfere with erasures before that silence obliterates, commemorative intervention. Experience comes in glimpses that we experience as a flow of consciousness, and that itself must be disturbed. I began the work of historical poetry, become ethical witnessing, acknowledging the delicacy and preparation of an education that would require. Poetry can be used to look away as much as it can be to look toward, through, and into. There are important distinctions in the work of lyric vision, such as this. One must be keenly aware of the differences between vision, hallucination, projection, distortion. What is your objective? What is the work you seek? And what values do you serve? When are you failing? What are your limits? How can you ever move meaningfully toward restitution? Through poetry. Ethical witnessing is a balance of knowledges, an alternation of currents between gathering of fact and context through history, language, affect, and atmosphere of knowledges that move through image, text, experience, swell up through the ground, move as waves in the air, traces of human feeling in our surround. We breathe it all in. Testimonies resemble traces in the fullness of their own forms. The stakes are nothing less than the record of what has been. I look down to the field where I walk every day to keep myself alive. And that field itself was the site of a removal fort, the beginning of a genocide. The body buried in an unmarked grave on the hillside, I live with that knowledge. That is what historical poetics means. Putting language as marker, calibration of meaning toward restitution. What will you do now that you know? What new resonance enters you? I saw the event long after it happened. What I saw when I was envisioning my invitation to you all, a gravestone, placing a piece of paper over it, writing what is on the other side, like a rubbing, but here with your knowing. What markers are there for us to read? I also saw a pine straw, light in the woods, a sidewalk from the vantage of someone looking down while walking, a starboard at the side of a boat. Sometimes it is exact. Sometimes it is the movement of your hand touching parts. That is the world. That's every time I approach the page, not as transcendence, but as deep listening. Thank you.
Alicia, I really love that. Alicia actually, I don't know if you all are aware of this, runs a beautiful publication, online publication called Annulet. I was fortunate enough to have a poem of mine from my first book, Dereliction, which is out with the Song Cave, published there, where Alicia was very helpful with a very minor but meaningful edit to the last line of that poem that I don't think I could have done alone. And that poem, I will hopefully read it a little bit later, because I think it's in conversation with all of this. I do not have a deeply organized discussion, but I'm going to try to kind of assemble some thoughts and some feelings that I have together in real time, guided by two texts, both by Aimé Césaire. The first is Calling the Magician, A Few Words for a Caribbean Civilization, and the second is Poetry and Knowledge, and both of these were published in Tropiques, different editions, I believe, but I don't have all of that off the top of my head. So I'll start by saying I am a self-trained poet. What I mean by self-trained is that I have a high school diploma. I do not have any higher formal education. I have a lot of informal education. through different poetry workshops facilitated by many poets that are here right now. Some of them in this room, some of them out at the fest, some of them who have passed. And that is the foundation of my education. And I bring that up because I think it's deeply important to note that how my poetic knowledge and intuition and logic is shaped by something a bit beyond me, but also in conversations beyond and others, which hopefully will become clear as I discuss. So I'm just going to read a bit from Calling the Magician, which it's kind of broken up into small paragraphs. One of these is the epigraph at the very beginning of my book, but I'll read maybe 1 through like 9 or 10 or something, if I can make this bigger. 1. From all our machines together, from all our roads charted in miles, from all our accumulated tonnage, from all our arranged airplanes, from our regulations, from our conditioning, not the slightest feeling could emerge. That is of another order, and real and infinitely more exalted. From all your manufactured thoughts, from your graded concepts, from all your concerted measures, not the slightest frisson of genuine civilization could result. That is of another order, infinitely more exalted and surrational. 2. I cannot stop admiring the great Caribbean silence, our insolent wealth, our cynical poverty. 3. You have encircled the globe, you have yet to embrace it warmly. 4. True civilizations are poetic shocks, the shock of the stars, of the sun, the planet, the animal, the shock of the round globe, of the rain, of the light, of numbers, the shock of life, the shock of death. Since the Sun Temple, since the mask, since the Indian, since the African man, too much distance has been calculated here, has been granted here, between things and ourselves. 5. The true manifestation of civilization is myth. Social organization, religion, partnerships, philosophies, morals, architecture, and sculpture are all representations and expressions of myth. 6. Civilization is dying all around the world because myths are dead or dying or being born. We must wait for the powdery frost of outdated or emancipated myths to blow apart. We are awaiting the debacle. 7. And we shall be fulfilled. 8. And I'll stop here, actually, or maybe 9. In the current state of things, the only avowed refuge of the mythic spirit is poetry. I'm going to read that again. In the current state of things, the only avowed refuge of the mythic spirit is poetry, and poetry is an insurrection against society because it is a devotion to abandoned or exiled or obliterated myth. 9. Civilization is not built by means of schools, clinics, or statistical calculations. Only the poetic spirit corrodes and builds, erases, and invigorates. And this goes on for, I think, 19, 20 actually more points or brief paragraphs or thoughts. And I share and I start there because that is such, I remember reading this text for the first time and I had felt very kind of out of place with what my poetics was doing, or I didn't have any words or any names or any qualifiers for like what I was attempting to do, or also what to call the relationship between my mind, my spirit, my body, and my writing that happened naturally and very organically since I was like a young child. And I think for a long time I thought, you know, in childhood, like I was just creative, like, you know, just kind of, you know, big imagination. But that never went away and it became something much larger than an imagination. And I think it goes back to even what Alicia was saying, like this ethical witnessing and deep listening of things around me. I found it very easy to enter into other I would say, states of being or embodiment with, on a very micro and very macro scale, across really large expanses of time. I don't think I don't think this is a weird space to share this, but kind of like you mentioned, it feels kind of strange because I don't feel like I get to talk about this side of poetry a lot. But like when I think about any psychic endeavor that my poetry touches on, it's deep past. It's not ever deep future. I think often when I'm met with kind of thoughts about psychic activity, it's about what's happening in the future, where I feel very in tune with a long line of information coming from the past, a geological timeline of information. And I love particularly number, what was it, 9? Where am I? No, number 8, that in the current state of things, just under 3 minutes. In the current state of things, the only avowed refuge of mythic spirit is poetry. So since I have 3 minutes, I'll read very quickly just one. This is from Poetry and Knowledge, also by Cicierre. It's called, it's kind of like the end thought of all his notes. And then I'll read a poem. The music of poetry cannot be external. The only acceptable poetry comes from somewhere beyond sound. The search for music is a crime against poetic music, which can only be the breaking of the mental wave against the rock of the world. The poet is that very old and very new, very complex and very simple being who, within the lived confines of the dream and the real, day and night, between absence and presence, seeks and receives in the sudden unleashing of internal cataclysms the password of complicity and power. And then I'll read briefly a poem, maybe 2 of mine. This is Of the Lucky You Are Chosen. Out of the window of a speeding Oldsmobile, a young girl's reflection dances on a prism of flyby crops. What she doesn't know, she doesn't know. Suffering, happily. Drinking her red pop, pondering the merging of all possible reality, the lifespan of rocks. Geologically speaking, she knows all life is lava-born, all chaos and structure naturally formed through fire and pressure, simple ingredients of fate and bacteria cycled through eons of gradually polluted atmosphere. Embryonically, her consciousness remains seafaring, unforgivably young. She revisions herself, a 10-million-year-old reptile creeping the shoreline, a bog-buried sacrifice excavated, her skull full of mud and bile, 3 petrified baby teeth fused to the jaw. It was a quick death, she remembers, a long life wandering. She knows what she knows, a child of the universe, suffering, happily, watching her reflection cautiously, considering the scene before her, a long road stretched thin towards a violent horizon. And then the last one is the one that Alicia graciously published and edited, if I can find it. No? Yeah, it's called Butter Sunday. Come to the apartment, we are so blessed here. Vanellope, ungloved, sips from her thin glass. Sean unravels the leather backgammon, sticks the sourdough in the oven, while I, who know nothing of bread, keep peering in, interrupting the conversation with psychic speculation. In the past, a warmongering spirit took hold of me. We still speak of the blood, years over the village kiln roasting livers with garlic and salt, filleted gut licking butter, arms strong from grinding peppercorn and braiding hair. Now it's somber fun, anytime giggling over homemade applesauce, an ever-growing fickleness into it, oolong in the hydro flask churning. Now I'm human crawling down the hallway on all fours crying, Lambrusco hip rolling through small space, well-fed my consolation. Thank you.
Great. also just sort of channeling and compiling. Oh wow, too much. Okay. I'm Leanne Brown, and I like to do what I think you call deep play. Playfulness is very much part of my practice, my whole life of playing with language, playing with words, playing with songs. I remember being in the library when I was little. The first time I saw a card catalog, and I immediately looked up magic and witch. It said black magic, white magic. I was like, okay, I'll read it all. You know, there was a book called The Witch Child and A Witch Family, and I read those. And the witch child went to school. She'd been homeschooled, I guess, for a while, and then she went to the human school, and they said, okay, what do you know? Say the alphabet. She said ZYXWVUTSRQPONMLKJIHGFEDCBA. So I thought if I learned it backwards, I could be a witch. So now, you know, everybody, there's lots of poetry witches online now. And it's like, but that kind of aspiration to tap into magic was part of my early desire. And you know, just to sort of make up games for yourself about how to be alive, you know, in your room or in the tree you climbed or whatever. So one thing I've been doing lately is, you know, I like to do little card games, and I'm in two different poetry postcard exchanges. And I also have this thing about saving everything up. So it's funny because I've written all these postcards with poems on them, and I haven't sent them yet. Most of them are addressed, and they have stamps. They're ready to go. So I was just going to play with some of these, but I also have some blank ones. So I was going to pass these out as I speak, and I've got 22 of them. If anybody wants to write anything they hear, because I think that sonic listening is part of poetry. So if you hear something I say that catches your ear, just put it on this card, okay? Can you help me pass it up? And you don't have to fill up the whole postcard. I can put more later. I might decorate the front more and stuff like that. But please give them back so I can mail them out. And to my list, I have these 2 lists. Okay, now I'm losing my tarot cards. I've been playing with the Blake Tarot a lot. It's the new moon, so happy new moon, everybody. It woke me up really early, so I was full of that. Okay, I'm just going to read a little poetry and do some bibliomancy with some things in my notebook, just see what happens. And I'm going to play this little thing from Sarah La Puerta just to start off. Yeah. This is a thing she did about astrological tones.
The use of vertical space is a trade secret. The use of vertical space is a trade secret of our love. When in doubt, just go up. The honeysuckle mountain ascends itself. At last, like the cold mountain twins, yet warm. Here we are in parallel space, listening in on nuthatch array. Finch on window as Raggedy Ann sleeps in my baby cradle, given me by my mom, who is excited to show me life and give me access to taut reality on the line. We are storm couplets born, up the mountain spiral swarm, guzzling up all the fairy juice served to us in Cashville over the rise. Got another poetry book in the mailbox, always surrounded by knotweed. If only I could take my own advice and come round now to finish thrice. I'll be named double southern, then form a treehouse bear cave coven. Over the desk, about how we lived well during the war, a warning of complacent sleep. But now I must depart after I sleep, deep dream, find a way to go on. And I just want to read a quote by Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe said, "What we term a long poem is in fact merely a succession of brief short poems." Okay, so these are like little brief poems that have compiled this thing I've been calling cumulative poem. But how much time do I have? I could read 3 minutes from that. Okay. This is, I started this in January, so I'm just finding ways to get myself to write on a more the daily basis and let myself have that moment. And I hope everybody can invent for themselves ways to make poetry in your life manifest. Cumulative song, and it has a quote from Pauline Oliveros' great book called Quantum Listening. People were talking about listening. So as you listen, the particles of sound decide to be heard. Listening affects what is sounding. It is a symbiotic relationship. As you listen, the environment is enlivened. This is the listening effect. So a lot of my poetry is about just listening. A lot of times, I'm hoping that people are listening and writing things down as cards. We need to be listening in all possible modes to meet the challenges of the unknown, the unexpected. So that's now, right? An extended meditation. Let the candle flame draw you back to the table, back into the page. An orrery of joy to thee, from and through me, hopefully, loving all the planets known and unknown, counted and countless, given the accordion award, multiplicity scratching an X on the old bulbs. Vitae scoops words as yet eternally in edit. I hear tablet chairs and woolen charms as crossover punctum of the portal of the listening to a reading. It always exists if you listen closely and quantumly. A fancy amaryllis blooms as you descend the stair simultaneously in considering the sentence. Please read to me the plum paragraph of Hilary Mantel again aloud and all the stippled variations of color and flavor. The line integrates the dream. The cento weaves the day, leaves the day open to ears of lilies, to libraries there for the sensing cat as local genius of the house, in the doorway of the kitchen, perched as my husband flips the last pages of his book. Oh, still a chapter to go. I've ordered a little indulgence for the baby of dear friends. Her name is Iris, like the rainbow, like the flower, which can be blue, purple, or even black, containing all colors at once, iridescent. I have not met her yet.
Merci. Thank you. Hello? Yes. And thanks for thank you for being here and for inviting me to this panel reading. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm so happy to be here. And thank you, Leanne, for, for your friendship and being always an inspiration and a mentor. And yes, what to say of all this? Thanks for everything you shared. As I was listening and thinking, I just wanted to
kind of share this question that I always have about the hermetic aspect of language and how poetry is always in between that hermetic level of interpretation. And on one side, I think it's important to maintain that kind of, it's not a secrecy, but it is a responsibility, I think, of the reader, of the poet, of the interpreter, to find it by themselves. And I think that this is not a knowledge that you get in school or you get you get it more through attention, right? Through deep attention, which is always inherited or is always present in nature, and it has always been there. And there is a Luis Landes Levy, a poet, that says how poetry is the great untaught yoga. Yoga meaning connection, right? Or integration. So poetry is a form, even though if you study or not, I think that it is a kind of spiritual path and a spiritual tradition. But the beauty of it is that it's untaught, and the great teacher is inside of you, and it's deep listening, it's attention, it's care, it's love. So I just wanted to share that. And of course, the empire wants to destroy that, and that has always been its method. And the great aspect of language and poetry, I think, is its multiple forms of being present, because it will be there as an illusion to the empire, but at the same time, it is in a hermetic way. I think it's holding that resistance, and so yeah, that's something I wanted to share for this panel. Yeah, well, this is a book that also starts with a quote, these poems by Paulino Oliveros. It's in Spanish, but I will translate it. El oído le dice al ojo en dónde escuchar. So the ear tells the eye where to listen. The ear tells the eye where to listen. And these are constellations. They're called score serpents for voice and body. So I work a lot with sound and with performance, and sometimes before performing or during, I do this kind of little spells that are a pre-listening, in a way, to the performance. So there are constellations. I'm going to try to read them in Spanish and in English, or back and forth. Constelación número 1. Para que el suelo suene, sintetiza al cauce. Gravedad vibrando, serpentea el canto coatlicue, canto que oscila, reptil sonoro, desciende al habla doble del giro lunar. For the earth to sound, synthesize. Okay, it's just hard to translate on the spot, but it talks kind of like about serpent and Coatlicue, which is the mythology of the goddess serpent, a goddess, fertility goddess. So it's kind of an invocation to the canto, the singing. So I don't know if the constellation is kind of trying to do what the serpent is doing through sound. So I'm gonna skip the constellations, sorry. But I do have some translations. This book is called Temples in Eruption and Video Stills. So they're kind of trying to be a still image a moment that comes out from time. And temples in eruption is inspired by volcanoes, which are temples erupting, temples that are alive, all like the great nature. So there's some translations here of those temples. And these are very hermetic poems that I also call them mind maps. So they're kind of like, or also like the meditation yantras, you know, which they're forms, they're systems that can be used in many levels. That's how I try to think of them. Your brain is opened by perception, thanks to the sound of a plane crossing the sky thousands of kilometers above you. Languages in states of simultaneous presence. From a bird's eye in this poem, we observe the map of your ideas, and a spill of purity floods with the color blue. It's the language of atomic systems in tension, the cobweb approximating to the understanding of chance's exact measurements, of channels connecting codes from above, in time, on earth. In this moment, in that which we see you through the place where you are absent, but then appear in the time-space of this page or this force field. Your organs, glands, hormones, ghost cells have diluted, have mutated into a new sense of existence, to remember the cardinal points behind the streets, buildings, gravity, electromagnetism, to remember behind the penumbra of longing, following light's manifold axis. I really like the etymology of recordar, to remember in Spanish, because it means to return to the heart. So in a way, I think all we do when we are deep listening is remembering. This is another video still. On a Tuesday at 3:33 in the afternoon, I received a call from a friend. He told me that someone he knew had called him the day before to say that she had dreamed that one day I would record Mount Vesuvius's sounds. The brain is buried in sulfur, in a scroll of forgotten minerals, lava and ash, with different orographic readings. When Vesuvius gave birth to its most exquisite magmas, the idea of cellular service, of antennas orbiting space, connecting voices or fictive narrations of lucid dreams, hadn't been downloaded from the archive embracing everything, from the 3.14, 16, 16, 16, 16, 16, 16. Finally, time is buried in ideas, ideas buried in actions at a distance, and the rest are intangible diagrams created by forces under an avalanche of rubble in the process of composting. Historians will continue to argue about Vesuvius's exact date of eruption, while its victims desperately wait for a call conducted by tiny communicating silica quartzes permitting the recording of smoke sounds, of mineral oracles, of sounds of memory orbiting ad infinitum. And the last one, it's actually a mix of many memories. Well, I won't tell them. The poem will speak for itself. In the peripheral break, located between consciousness and subconsciousness, I dreamed that I could access an eternal video transmission of the active volcano Popocatépetl, while Giordano Bruno recounted all the collective secrets placed in memory's labyrinths. We were sitting on Iztaccíhuatl, and with his hands he traced words in the air. Yet they weren't words, but dynamic, silent rites, moving clouds, birds, rocks, psychic libraries, and all of humanity's karmic agreements within them. Giordano went deeper and deeper into this intraterrestrial semiotics, and in the magma, in the center, was the future, compressed by the past that we also speculated on. The instant itself in eruption, on the live screen of my pineal gland. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for that. We have about 8 minutes if anyone would like to ask any questions or...
There's one thing I forgot to say. About the new moon. I had a conversation with Julie Patton, who's another collaborator and person I published in Tinder Buttons, in addition to Lucía. But we've been brainstorming an event that's going to happen at the Giorno Poetry Systems. So we're hoping to have it near the summer solstice. But we want to make a call. We birthed this idea of everybody, all the poets, we're going to make crowns of laurels, and we're going to take up our office as poets publicly, and we're going to wear these flower crowns or bay leaf crowns or whatever crown you want to take on the street in your life this whole year. We're going to be poets, and we're going to bring the eternal out into the volcanic eruption, the eternal work out. So that's, you're welcome. This is the birth of the movement, the new moon. I'm announcing that please become crowned with your laurels and make them real. Okay.
They could be morning reads or celebration. Morning. I have a simple question and a complex question. Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me? The first one, the name of the book, the Amy Césaire book you're reading from?
I read from Poetry and Knowledge and from Calling the Magician, a few words on Caribbean civilization, and they're short essays from, he published along with a few other surrealists, artistic surrealists, in a journal called Tropiques.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Sorry, I have the complex question now for the host. I'm sorry, I don't know. Tanner. So, thank you for this gorgeous panel, by the way. I am working with questions of consciousness right now, and distributed consciousness and trans-individual self, and also reading a lot about like plant consciousness and animal senses and so forth. And I, because you mentioned that this intersects some of your interests, I'm very curious right now, and sorry for the hugeness of this question and concept, and also the way it may be. Well, I'm interested in the concept of indigeneity itself as a humanist concept, and wondering if huge broad question, but if there might have been a non-humanist identification. I don't know, have you considered this question of the relationship between the concept of indigeneity and humanism as a sort of Western concept, I guess is the question, I'm sorry.
I mean, I think that the idea of humanism is obsolete, personally. I don't think that there's such a thing as a human, to be honest with you. That's going to be the answer to my question. And what I mean by that is, I mean, we're all in relation to one another. There's no isolated human. There's no such thing. what happens, you know, I teach meditation. If I go 3 days without this water, I'm dead. If I go a month without eating, I'm dead. This body is dead. If I go 3 minutes without this, you know, in the yogic sciences they call it the pavan guru, the air, you know, the energy in the air, I'm dead. So there's no me. It's a convenience. This is a convenience. And so, you know, the meditation that I did, what it brings you in touch with is that you are able to perceive without your eyes closed this space. It proves to you that your consciousness is beyond this physical body. So I think that the idea of the human, that's, you know, we should forget about it.
I guess, sorry, I just wanted to clarify, because I felt like my question was so huge. I think indigeneity or nativeness is such a reference point, right, for like the kind of dissolve of like maybe what you're talking about. And then I realized at some point, is that right? Is that distinction held, you know, by native and indigenous people themselves, right? Or is that like a Western concept that's like ascribing a humanist? Sorry, it's maybe a little intellectual, but.
You know, I can really only speak for this.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many different conceptions of and ontologies that I don't think that I can speak for anyone else besides myself. Are there any, thank you though for the question. Is there any other questions?
I really just want to know, can you stay with the name frequently recognized?
Mine?
Yes.
The last one is called
Yes.
Templos en erupción, temples in eruption.
What's the press?
The press is Juan Malasuerte, which is a press that we're actually reading the editors here from Mexico, and we're reading on Saturday at Always Stars, or something like that, Always something, at 2:30. Diego?
Yeah.
2:30. And the book, they sell it in the table.
More questions?
Time for maybe one more question.
One more. My card's back.
Thank you.